Welcome back to Face the Nation. Ahead of the first anniversary of the Trump administration, we have CBS News YouGov Nation Tracker poll results. CBS News Elections and Surveys Director Anthony Salvanto joins us to break down the data. Welcome, Anthony. It's always great to have you back. Let's start just with the headline of this survey. What's the headline?
Well, people think the economy is doing better than it was a year ago, but that's not how they're evaluating the president. They're evaluating him personally and whether or not they like how he's handling himself personally. You know, in fact, a year ago, we asked people how they would look at this president, and that was what they said they were going to look at. Over time, there's a bit of a what might have been to his approval ratings in that we had this middle group of the country who at the start said that they were either conditionally supporting the president or they weren't supporting him, but they were looking for a reason to come over to his side. Well, that middle group has shrunk over time, and it's moved toward the polls, where he's got a small group of very firm supporters and a now larger group of very firm opponents, whom we've called resistors. Well, as people have moved to those polls and as they've moved towards resistance, you talk to them and they say they admit the economy is doing better. They think manufacturing jobs are returning. But when they evaluate the president, they use words like they're embarrassed. They don't like how he's handling himself, and that's what affects their judgment.
And these are people you've looked at over the course of a year. I mean, you've been looking at the country for a year. This is a view you've taken over a long period of time. Those who were conditionally potentially open to supporting the president, was the economy what they were looking for from him? What was causing them to get over those personal hurdles in the first place?
Yeah, the conditionals were more focused on policy. The conditionals said not just cut my taxes, not just bring manufacturing jobs back. They've said that those things are happening. But at the same time, then you talk to them about the political fights that they see going on. They don't like those as much. They don't like the tweeting. They never have. They would rather see things focused on policy. His best numbers came when he started cutting deals with Democrats. And now, look, by definition, you're going to bring over more people if you do that. But for those conditional supporters, those were the kinds of things that they were looking for. When they got it, things moved up. But at the same time, those folks who were more on the fence, who were looking for a reason to support, they feel like the president has disrespected people like them. And it underscores just how personal this has been for a lot of folks.
So it feels like the personal focus of all these responses has put an asterisk on or changed James Carville's famous thing that it's the economy stupid, that if you can get the economy right, everything else falls into place. Let me ask you about this. What is the country now going into this next year? What are their priorities? What are they concerned about?
Yeah, well, we talked about this. We asked people, if you could give the State of the Union, what would you say? And while they would say the economy is doing better, most folks said that they felt like we were divided. And back to this point about the personal being involved, the president's opponents feel like not just he's disrespected them, but for many, they feel like he's working against their group in particular. A lot of our African-American respondents felt like the president was working against their group. A lot of folks felt like he was working against their economic class. Remember, we saw a lot of people vote for the president because they thought that he would do well by folks who had been left behind by the new economy. Well, that's only at best mixed. There are a lot of folks who feel like he hasn't addressed the needs of folks who are more working class, and that sort of moved them away. Again, very personal, very group-based.
Well, so if people are feeling personal and they feel like the president is threatening their group, there is, though, that group of core supporters who think, finally, somebody's speaking for me about this president. How big is that group the president once referred to by saying I could shoot somebody in Fifth Avenue and still have support? How big is that group, and is it at the same size that it was a year ago when you started this project?
It is a little bit smaller, but not much. It is at 18% now. That is the core of the core. We've labeled them the believers. They think things are going terrifically. They believe that the president is making their culture and their way of life safer. They think that he is, and they say that he is, bringing back jobs. All of those things are going well. But the big difference for them is that they seem to relish the political fights that they see, while others, including his other conditional supporters, do not. They prioritize taking on the media, they want him to investigate Hillary Clinton. That's what they see going forward. And that really separates them from the rest of the group. So as it's gotten a little bit smaller, it's gotten a little more intense.
Let's talk about Democrats for a moment. They see big chances in 2018 to take advantage of this unhappiness with the president. Let's first of all, the unhappiness about the president. Where is his overall approval rating, and what do you find about that?
His overall approval rating has been in the high 30s throughout his presidency. In fact, if you look historically at the history of the CBS News poll, we have not seen a president whose numbers have moved so little in the course of the first year. Most of them move much more. That tells you a story about polarization. It tells you a story about division and how folks don't change the way they're thinking very often. But at the same time, if you look at the Democrats, and as we head into a midterm year, they cannot, the numbers are clear, they cannot simply be a default choice for people who don't like the president. When we ask folks if they'd consider voting for a Republican who was who was more independent from the president, another third of folks of independents say that they would. So the Democrats are still in play there with a group that could consider somebody, more moderate, or could consider what they will do. And when you ask folks, what do you think the Democrats will do if they take power, people are split. They say, well, will they go after the president, or will they try to work with the president? And they get more potential votes from people who say they will try to work with the president.
So there's a danger for Democrats making this all about Donald Trump, because there's some voters who want to see them work with the president. All right, Anthony, thanks so much for being with us. And we'll be right back with our panel. And we're joined now by our panel. Susan Page is the Washington bureau chief of USA Today. Jamelle Bouie is the chief political correspondent for Slate magazine and a CBS News political analyst. Amy Walter is the national editor at the Cook Political Report. And Jonah Goldberg is a senior editor at the National Review. Welcome to all of you. Susan, I want to start with you first. We have this scene in the Oval Office, which had everybody using a word we're not going to use, but a vulgar and derogatory term that both Senator Durbin said the president used and Senator Graham has said the president used, but Tom Cotton said doesn't remember it. Senator Perdue was in the room, said it was not used. Where are we?
This is really quite extraordinary. Here we're talking about the president, credible reports that the president used a term so inflammatory, so offensive that we can't say it on air, and to a bipartisan group of senators. It wasn't just with his best friend in a casual conversation. This is shocking. And I think one of the things that is perhaps most alarming to the White House is the degree to which the president's credibility has eroded such that we are inclined to believe, I think most of Washington is inclined to believe, Senator Durbin and Senator Graham rather than the president. It took the White House 12 hours to decide to dispute that the language was used. And this has huge repercussions for the effort to reach a deal in Washington. Our Democrats are they going to make a deal with a president who would use a term like that? And real global repercussions too. We've heard provocative language before, but this strikes me as being pretty serious.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. The idea about any deal getting done on almost anything for the next year, whether it's infrastructure or whether it's immigration. If the president one day is saying, I want a bill of love publicly and talking about bringing in Chuck and Nancy and we're going to work this all out, and then behind closed doors with a bipartisan group says this, if you're a Democrat, even one who wants to work with the president, you say, well, I don't know what I can trust. How can I possibly? The trust gap has been completely eroded over the course of the year. Now it's almost gone. And you're right, it puts Democrats also in the position of saying, how can we negotiate with somebody and go back to our base and say, yeah, I'm going to work with somebody who says these things about other people who are in this country.
There's a flip problem, not just the problem for Democrats, there's a problem for Republicans and conservative commentators who, in the first 12 hours before the White House decided to deny this, and when reportedly Donald Trump was calling friends and bragging about it, people were going out there defending the fecal crater comments on the grounds that, oh, of course, it's absolutely true, thus blurring the lines between the Republican Party and the worst aspects of Trumpism. And now you have this problem where they now pull back and say, no, we're denying it. So you have this really weird position, which is sort of in miniature, classic example of how Trump leaves so many people out to dry, where Senator Perdue says at first, I didn't hear it. And now he says, I heard him not say it. It's very difficult to figure out how you can say I didn't hear something and then say I affirmatively heard that he didn't say something. And you end up leaving a lot of people looking like fools or desperate, like Cory Gardner was earlier, of trying to and Senator Cotton was, of trying to argue the merits of a policy that is so at odds with the rhetoric of the president.
Right. I mean, Senator Cotton maintained that what President Trump wants is an immigration system that treats people based on who they are, the skills they bring, themselves as individuals. But the president's remarks were basically this ecological judgment that if you come from a country that he believes is a poor, unworthy country, then you are a poor, unworthy person who does not deserve to be in this country. And to then contrast that with a white European country is to make remarks that are so, in my mind, incredibly clear about the meaning that it's somewhat bewildering to me that anyone could even dispute what the meaning was.
It's also worth pointing out that the Nigerians and a lot of the Africans who come here are actually better educated than even the Norwegians who come here or the native-born Americans here. And that's sort of the problem with the disconnect with the
the politically most surprising, shocking thing I heard Senator Cotton say was to suggest that Senator Durbin made this up for political gain and that he is known to have misrepresented White House conversations in the past. What kind of meeting are we going to see in the Senate this week as they try to get this weekend deadline to fund the government? Just who is going to feel like, let's join hands and avoid a shutdown?
That's right. So Cotton and Perdue have made that claim because Perdue said that to George Stephanopoulos. Also, Amy, Senator Cotton seemed also to go one step further in our conversation because he said, leaving the word aside, he said the president did not group people in this fashion no matter what, and which is a little bit at odds with what the White House has said, which is he had strong sentiment but not the specific word.
That's right.
Now Senator Cotton is saying the sentiment wasn't even there, which is, it seems to me to be taking this further.
Well, and once again, we are not talking about policy, we're talking about personality. And that's what makes any kind of compromise or any kind of work done in Congress at all impossible, that the merits of the actual legislation, which, by the way, have been handled in the past. There was a bill passed in the United States Senate with Republican support in 2013 that addressed this chain migration, family migration issue, that addressed border security, that addressed many of the issues that are coming up once again, which do need to be handled in a bipartisan way. They were handled. Obviously, they never made it to the House, and it never passed. But this idea that Democrats are trying to do this simply to embarrass the White House or to make the president look bad, or that we can even have a conversation about this policy, we could if the president weren't part of the conversation, and that's impossible.
I think it's probably going to be hard to overstate how much Democratic voters and liberal activists and Democratic-based voters are just going to want to have nothing to do with an immigration deal, because with these remarks and with other remarks the president's reportedly made, this signals that immigration reform for the president isn't about finding a more rational system for doing this. It's primarily a way of punishing people that the president believes do not deserve to be here. And if that is the frame with which the president is acting, then I cannot imagine a Democrat is going to be able to go back to African-American leaders or Latino leaders and say, we cut a deal with him.
That's the largest dilemma for conservatives like me and for Republicans. I'm not 100% on Tom Cotton's plan, but I like Tom Cotton's plan, and I have no problem with a skills-based immigration plan. But if you're arguing for a skills-based immigration plan, which is actually contradictory to the things Trump allegedly said, but if you're doing it in the context of defending President Trump's comments, you are immediately, for reasonable people, Democrats, independents, and even Republicans, basically making the argument that this is the immigration plan that Donald Trump wants because Donald Trump doesn't like these countries. Even though I don't think Donald Trump understands that this immigration plan contradicts this sweeping generalization of Africans and Haitians and El Salvadorans, because it would actually let in skills-based, immigrants from these countries. But it all gets muddied up and shows the corrupting power that Trump has of the Republican Party, because it ends up being a defense of his personality and his statements rather than any serious argument about policy.
And Susan, some didn't go this far. Paul Ryan said it was unfortunate, this language. So that's not the danger that Jonah's talking about, which is defending, but it's not, I mean, if the language is true, yes, it's more than unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, once again, we see it's actually been a surprise to me, the reluctance of Republican leaders, including Paul Ryan, who has a history on racial issues that is a positive and admirable one, the reluctance that they continue to show about being very critical of Donald Trump when he says things that are so provocative. And I think there are Republicans, the only Republicans who are willing to do this are Republicans who don't plan to run for office again, like Jeff Flake, for instance, in Arizona. And I think that is a sign that the Republican Party is now the party of Trump. If you're going to run as a Republican, you better not be too much at odds with President Trump.
Well, this idea, too, that the party can separate itself from the president, to Jonah's point, it makes it very difficult now for any of these Republicans who are going to try to run as I'm just going to be a check on the president, or I can criticize the president but hold my own. It is really hard. Everything that now passes Congress or doesn't pass Congress gets the name Trump labeled on it, and you now have to defend both the president and the policy.
I'll say just a sort of related aside here, what's a little funny about all of this is that there is this hesitancy on part of Republican leaders to just flatly label what President Trump said as racist. That was a racist thing to say, that it sort of signals racism that's come from his rhetoric. So there's a hesitancy to say that, but in the immediate aftermath of the remarks, the White House, reports from inside the White House said that some White House officials thought this would play well with Trump's base, that Trump supporters thought this was, might think this was swell. And if that's the case, then there really shouldn't be as much hesitancy as there seems to be about labeling it racist.
We're going to pick it up on that when we come back, but we need to take a short break right now. We'll be right back with more from our panel. And we're back with our panel. Jonah, I want to go pick up on what Jamel was saying. Let me look at it this way. I'm a Republican, and I say, okay, maybe salty language, not the best way to put it, but he passed tax cuts. The president got lots and lots of judicial nominees through. He's cutting regulations all over the place. Lots of achievements, and this is just part of his roughness, but boy, he's put points on the board.
I mean, he has put points on the board. I mean, what has two thumbs and likes tax cuts and conservative judicial appointments? This guy. But the larger problem is that the rhetoric and the drama of the presidency turns off more people than it attracts. And politics ultimately is about addition, not subtraction. And Donald Trump is a divisive president for the country, but the relevant point, asking in your hypothetical Republican situation, is that he's a divisive person in the Republican Party. And as we were saying during the break, as Jamel was pointing out, Alabama was only possible, the Doug Jones victory is only possible because a lot of suburban Republican voters were just so embarrassed about Roy Moore. That same dynamic, I think, applies, we saw it in the poll numbers earlier, across the Republican Party. A lot of Republican voters who like these specific things are embarrassed, they're demoralized, they don't want to have to defend Donald Trump at work or at their kids' school. And it creates, and meanwhile, he energizes Democrats and liberals in profound ways, which I just think is setting the kindling for a huge prairie fire in 2018.
Now, Cory Gardner, who of course is heading the Senate campaign committee for the Republicans, said in your interview, people are fired up. Yeah, Democratic people are fired up.
Right.
And we've seen in every election we've had this year, Democrats outperforming what we would expect them in terms of turnout. And that is probably the best possible news for Democrats heading into the midterms.
Is the House now, Democrats need 24 seats to pick up 24 seats to have control of the House. Where does that stand in the prognostication business?
In the prognostication world, it looks like a better chance than not that the House flips. And a lot of it is due to this intensity. The base is important if the base is bigger. Right now in your own poll, the hardcore base is 18%. 18%. The hardcore Trump base is not enough. And the other question that I've been looking at too is where are independents? We talk a lot about Trump winning the base, but remember, even in 2016, he lost the national vote, but he won independents. He took 46% of independents. He's only getting a third of those voters now. What we've seen in past wave elections is one side's fired up, the other side's not. That's important, as Susan pointed out. But independents break overwhelmingly for the other party. And in this case, if the independents give the Republican candidates only 30-something%, you can't win an election only carrying that percent.
And that's particularly true with a lot of retirements, right? Because the open seats are more likely to go against the president's party.
It doesn't just endanger Republican control of the House, it endangers Republican control of the Senate. It's still unlikely that Democrats win the Senate. They have a very high uphill battle, but it's more likely than it was last year. It's more likely than it was 6 months ago that Democrats can can pull the hat trick and win the Senate, and in which case that completely just cripples in the Republican agenda for the next election cycle.
What do you think of the argument following on what Jamil said? If I'm a Republican, I could imagine, well, if the Democrats take control, they're going to impeach the president, and therefore use that as the thing to scare Republicans to the ballot box. Do you think that's an effective strategy, or is it the only strategy?
Well, I think it is probably true. I think it is probably correct that if Democrats gain the House, there are going to be a lot of Democrats elected with the idea that they're going to go after the president in a serious way. And that could be trouble for the Democrats down the road. We've seen with President Clinton's impeachment, it does not necessarily serve your interest, even if you can show that there was wrongdoing or misconduct. I think the Republicans I talk to, Amy, I'd be curious if you feel this way too. The Republicans I talk to think the House is gone. They think it is unlikely they can hold the House. And the question Republicans now face is, what are the longer-term consequences of the presidency of Donald Trump, and whether attitudes toward African Americans and Hispanics and to millennials are going to guarantee Republicans trouble going 4 and 8 and 12 and 20 years down the road.
Well, that was the argument that we had after the 2012 election, right? No Republican can possibly win only by putting together a coalition of older white Americans. And then Donald Trump proved that wrong. This is the other challenge for Republicans, for this president. He's run for president exactly one time, as he points out, and he won. And nothing that he's doing now is any different from what he did in 2016. And there's no reason to do anything different than he did in 2016 because it was successful. It got him through the primaries. It got him through a general election. Why should he possibly change that? Unless or until there are consequences, I don't think it's ever going to change.
But that's the problem. There are consequences, right? I mean, I take your point. He hasn't changed. He hasn't pivoted. Waiting for the pivot is like waiting for Godot. But the fact is that the behavior he did on the campaign trail, which was interesting and it worked against Hillary Clinton, who was a particularly problematic candidate for the Democrats, is unpresidential in a president. And so his approval ratings, his support, all of that has plummeted. And normally when presidents' approval ratings plummet, they change their behavior and they start reaching out. And so I think that is the consequence. His approval rating is so low, that's dangerous for Republicans, but he seems unwilling to get off this idea that all he needs to do is please the base, which is just strange to me.
And I think long term there really is a chance that this rising electorate does turn decisively against Donald Trump. Years ago, I want to say David Frum said that young voters, people my age, who grew up during the Bush administration, will be voting against George W. Bush for the rest of their lives. And I think we're going to have a generation like that for Donald Trump, voting against Donald Trump for the rest of their lives.
We're going to have to end it there. It is not the rest of our lives, but it is the rest of this show. Thanks for our panel, and we'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow on CBS This Morning, along with Gayle King and Norah O'Donnell. And I'll see you next Sunday, right here on Face the Nation.